You're listening to Talking Fatherhood, a CHKD podcast. And now for your hosts, Andrew Jateau and Bryson Creighton.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Talking Fatherhood podcast. I am your host, Andrew Jateau. I am excited to be joined by my co-host, Bryson Creighton. How you doing today, sir?
I am doing phenomenal, my man. How are you?
I am doing good. I'm excited because today's episode is all about you, and you are on the hot seat today. So for those who don't know, and I was trying to recall to see if we brought it up on the podcast before, but Bryson and his wife are expecting baby number 3.
Yes.
Coming up soon. So we thought what would be a very, very cool episode would be to talk to Bryson about his experience thus far, because as you all know, baby number 1 is a game changer, and baby number 2 is a game changer. And so baby number 3, that's an experience that I don't have and I will never have. So this is all Bryson. It's all you, and you sort of lead us through what the experience has been like. I do want to talk about, just kind of start with what it was like talking to the girls, because you have 2 girls already. And so
Yes.
breaking to the news to them that you guys were expecting, what was that like?
Yes. So this journey, and I intentionally refer to it as a journey. Andrew, I think we've talked about this in pockets. I don't know to what depth, but ideally, baby number 3 would have come maybe 3 years ago, roughly 3 years, maybe 4 potentially. 3 years ago would have been like the actual plan for baby number 3. That was our initial plan. We always wanted our children to be in that 2 to 3 year age gap. And unfortunately, my wife was injured in December 2019 and at work, and that recovery time frame took about 3.5 years. So coming up to the point of even, I don't want to say making the decision to have another child, but coming up to the point of reconfirming that original decision that we made a while back, created a little bit of angst and challenge given the injuries that my wife had and the surgeries that she had and things of the like. So there was a question at some point where, hey, do we even do this? Even though it was our aspiration in the beginning when we decided to have kids on the onset. So that's just a little bit of a step in the past. And so leading up to this, we did give ourselves a deadline. This was not a open invitation for baby number 3 to come whenever baby number 3 wants to come.
Right.
We gave ourselves a deadline of what I believe it was end of March this year. So that was our deadline. Like, hey, if it happens, great. If it does not happen, then we're done.
Right.
So as you know, what was it? February, we found out we were pregnant. And so we waited to inform our children. We waited, and it was hard. It was hard to wait, because it's like, for those of you that have had multiple children, you understand that your partner's body starts going through significant changes. And like for baby number 1, those changes come gradually. Baby number 2, they come a little quicker. I'll tell you, if you've not surpassed 2, the third one, it's like almost immediate.
Yeah.
So like the wearing of clothing and things are like really changes some things, because the body's going through those changes significantly faster.
Right. And not just like the physical, but like,
No.
needing to sleep and,
Yes.
just personality stuff, appetite changes as well. to that kids pick up on, like,
Yes.
why is mommy so tired? So yeah.
Uh-huh. All of those things were happening. And I'll be honest, I had the thought that was a potential. I didn't mention it, but it was in the back of my mind because I noticed she was more tired and things of the like. So
Mm.
anyway, back to your original question around like what was the experience of informing our children that they were going to have a younger sibling, because at the time we did not know what we were having. So we went on a vacation over spring break. So we found out we were pregnant in February. We waited until March over spring break to surprise them. We took a road trip to Arizona, which in itself was a little bit of a challenge given my wife was pregnant. So, 15 to 17 hours in the car. She did great.
Yeah.
But we did a scavenger hunt. So we created a game around it. We had the girls go on a scavenger hunt. I think we had like 10 or 12 different things that they needed to find around the property with clues. We took them along this path that basically told them they were going to be, they were going to have a younger sibling. And let me say this, when they found out, like when they got it, there was like 5 to 10 seconds of uber excitement and then ultimate 3-4 hour meltdown. Ultimate meltdown. Tears. They needed hugs. They needed to be held. They didn't know what to say. They had no words. And we were significantly surprised. And me and my wife, we had no clue what to think or feel.
Right.
And how to support them through this. And so
was that even like a reaction you thought might happen?
It never crossed our mind in that way.
Right.
And here's why though. That like their reaction was a big surprise because they had already like primed the idea for like the past like year and a half or so. They were like, oh hey, are we gonna, we would like to have a little brother or sister or what, as kids do. And so they're putting this out there and things of the like. So we didn't expect them to have this reaction.
Right.
And so in the end, we ended up getting to the point where we could have a conversation. Andrew, as you know, and for those of you that are listening, we are very intentional about speaking and having conversations with our children as opposed to just telling them what it should be or what it could be. We are, if you want to say, parenting them to be very intertwined with how they're feeling and how to deal with those things in a positive manner, regardless of what the feeling is. And so once we got to that point, this is probably an hour and a half in of tears. Our oldest, she says, I'm super excited, but being the oldest is really, really hard and comes with a lot of responsibility. And now this is a 6-year-old at the time. And we're like, wait a minute, like, what do you mean? And she said, well, they have to learn from you. You have to take care of them. I'm like, okay, time out, pause. You, 6-year-old daughter, do not have to take care of anybody but yourself.
Yeah.
That being said, I understand how it can be stressful or frustrating to think about all the things that a new sibling is going to want to learn from you, but understand that that's not your responsibility. And then our youngest, her reaction, she was tearful, but I think she was more tearful because our oldest was tearful. I don't think that was like her direct response, but as we kind of started to work through it, it turned into excitement because she, like, probably over the last year or so, she's like, I don't like being the youngest and the smallest one in the house. And, all of these things. So,
Yeah.
so I think that was the reaction. So that was the experience of telling our children. And so after that, like 3 hour spat,
Mhm.
it was all great. They're super excited. They're like, oh, what do we need to get? Oh, this is the thing. It just clicked in my mind.
Uh,
Our youngest daughter was mainly upset because she doesn't understand the process of a child growing in mommy's belly. She was expecting baby to be here like tomorrow. She's like, oh
oh
no.
yeah, that is disappointing. Yeah.
So once she got past understanding the fact that, hey, this is a 8-month process from where we were,
Mhm.
uh, she became comfortable with it. So that was the announcement process. And we're super, Andrew, you know this, we had this conversation about like naming children, right? Like we're super
Right.
intentional about certain things. And so when we went to tell our kids about this, we wanted it to be an experience. We wanted it to be a memorable thing that they could say, this is how it happened. And so
Right.
that just, that's the color behind it all.
Okay. So I mean, yeah, this is the first time that I'm hearing that as well too. I know when I'd ask you about it, you'd always say it was an experience. So looking back, is there anything you think you might have done differently that
Yeah.
might have elicited a different reaction, or any recommendations you might have to parents who might be sitting down with their child to let them know that another one's on the way?
Yeah. I think for me, to be honest, I don't think we would have done it any different. And I say that mainly because I'm not one, and my wife really is not one to get tied into like, hey, what's the reaction going to be like? I like the raw reaction,
Mhm.
right? Like I think that's the most genuine. And so when we planned it, like I said, we planned it to be an experience, and it was fun. They had a blast doing the scavenger hunt. They
Mhm.
really had to solve some interesting things. And so it was fun for them to do that. So I don't know that we would have done it any different. Now, in terms of if you are in this position, or if you're expecting to be in this position in the future, to share this information with your child, I think you just have to take a step back and understand what type of environment you've created for your child, how
Mhm.
you and your family operate. And what I mean by that is, for instance, if you're a one child household, like what type of attention does that child get?
Right.
Because the first thing that's going to come to their mind, depending on how old they are, is going to be, oh, well, this may be exciting if they can understand what it is, what it
Mhm.
means. But the other reaction is, well, I'm no longer going to have all the focus on me. Right.
Right.
And so that could elicit a little bit of a negative reaction. If you are having, you know, baby number two, or sorry, not baby number two, but baby number 3 or 4 or whatever may have you, then there's a little bit of a buffer depending on the age of your other children. And so, the focal point then becomes what, again, it's the same thing. What is the experience for those children? In our scenario, again, we empower our children to be who they are, feel how they feel, do as they do within reason and structure.
Right.
uh, but you know, the relationship between our two daughters is very strong.
Mhm.
But it can be very frustrating, especially for our oldest, who wants her individuality, wants her space at times, and our youngest wants to be able to learn about the things that our oldest is doing. And so that creates some angst. And so interject another child. Now we can start to understand why telling our oldest that we're going to have another child elicited the reaction that came, right?
Right.
Because she's like, oh well, now this person is going to want everything from me as well.
Right.
So she felt like it was going to double down. So that's my advice. My advice is you really need to pay attention to how you operate in your environment, the relationship with your children, or the relationship with your child. If you are, and Andrew, you know this, we were just having this conversation over the weekend with a few friends here at the house, and the going from 1 to 2 is probably the hardest thing outside of the initial child.
Right.
But even with the initial child, there's a little bit of yes, it changes how you operate, but in many instances, it may only change how one person operates, one of the parents, assuming it's a 2-parent household.
Mm.
When you go to 2, there's multiple impacts. Everybody's day of life gets impacted. It is no longer a, what I like to say, zone defense scenario. When you have one parent can take care of the child while the other does whatever they need to do, and vice versa, the trade-off. But when you have 2, both parents have to now split time with all the things in life at the same time. Not to mention that child has to split time between them and their parents, because now you have this other being in the mix. So there's a lot that goes into it. So that Andrew, to your question, that is the advice. The advice is you just have to listen and pay attention to the relationships that exist in your home currently, and figure out a way to, hopefully it's a positive event and not a negative event that you're having another child. So to bring that into the mix, and allow everybody to be excited and prepare for what's about to come.
Yeah, and I think you also bring up a good point, just in terms of like emotional preparedness from your kids, where you were talking about like wanting to see that raw reaction, where I think that, and I, especially for myself, if I could keep my kids from experiencing a negative emotion and I can prepare them for that, then I try to do that. But there is a lot of benefit for them just, okay, how are you feeling right now? Even if it is a meltdown, because, not all emotion is bad emotion. And who
Right.
knows if you had tried to have some sort of intervention where you were trying to control their reaction and emotion, you may not never have gotten to that deeper part to where she was talking to you about the responsibilities of being the older kid. So, even though it resulted in a 3-hour meltdown and probably didn't feel good at the time, it sounds like a lot of good actually came out of that experience as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The nice thing about this scenario is neither my wife or I had that experience as a child. We're both the youngest in our family. So we never knew what it was like to be the older sibling. So we couldn't relate. So we had no choice but to take in the raw emotion for what that looked like from both of our children. So, so I think there's that factor as well. As parents, this goes beyond, this experience, but in my opinion, as parents, we have to be careful about trying to curate or avoid a reaction because of our own experiences or what we may want to happen.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's a good point that I'm trying to relate to. I just know if I can avoid a meltdown, then it's like, all right, what can I do? But to your point, I do think that there's benefits to seeing that raw reaction. So, but I do want to shift. I think talking about how they reacted, I want to shift and talk about what things are going to look like, or what you anticipate
Yes.
things will look like now that baby number 3 is entering the picture specifically, and I don't know if you want to break the news or I'll
Yeah,
break the news, but it's a boy
it
this
is.
time around, and so that's what you and I have had in common is that we both had two daughters, and
Yes.
so you decided to mess around and bring a boy into this dynamic. And we've had conversations about differences between raising boys and
Mm,
raising girls, and in the discussions that I've had with other dads and presentations that I've done on fatherhood, something that I've always said is raising your kids almost kind of the same.
yes.
It's that you don't want to treat them differently and be more gentle with the girl and more rough and tough with the boy and not allow the boy to express emotion. And that's always something that, I say, and I always tell myself, yeah, if I had a son, that's what I
Yeah.
would do, but never really had to, live up to it or put my money where my mouth is.
Right.
You're just one of those things of being the expert, but I haven't experienced that, and the pressures that might come with raising a boy in this society as well too. So I would just like to hear from you in terms of what do you think will be different with baby number 3, and then what do you think will be different with baby number 3 being a boy? Like how does
Yes.
that change dynamics and everything in your household?
Let me say this. If baby number 3 was a girl, I
Mhm.
think the shift would be a little less. I've been a very proud girl dad. Uh,
Mhm.
many of my friends are like, man, you're just made to be a girl dad, right? Bringing a
Right.
boy into the mix, it doesn't change the way that I parent in my mind,
Mhm.
right? But but to your point, there is a little bit of reality that comes along with it. I think oftentimes, at least from what I've seen, and we'll see what this looks like for our household, but oftentimes what I've seen is girls get a lot more leeway than boys do, right?
Mhm.
And it typically comes from the father. Boys will typically get more structure, more, I don't want to say demand necessarily, but more explicit direction on how to be a child, right? Oftentimes, like you said, the emotional component. Hey, don't cry, don't do this, get over it. Or,
Right.
you're going to play sports. Like, all of these things come with a boy. Those expectations and things don't exist with girls. It's like, do whatever you want. Right? You want to play sports? Great. You want to do music? Great. You want to do art? Great. You want to do nothing? Great. For boys, the immediate expectation is obviously sports.
Mhm.
It's like, it's just not a good thing. So when we start to go through this, and we're gearing up for this, but we have to be very open in our minds and also in actuality on what
Right.
this is going to look like. So it does present some challenges, and on paper I'd like to say we're prepared, but I mean, at the end of the day, and until baby's here, and even for the first, I'd say like 2 years, we're in like we got training wheels on, like significant training wheels, and then when they come off,
Right.
we'll see
Right.
what
Yeah.
hits the fan.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's definitely going to be a transition, just like you said, 7 years of raising girls and then, transitioning to raising a boy. I will say that girls do have expectations. I think it's like a different set of expectations. And for us, it might be because there is the whole, girls aren't supposed to do that. That's not very
Right.
ladylike. Act like this or act this way. So they do have those expectations. I think for us, it's easier to empower them to cross that line and tell them, like, you can do whatever you want. Like,
Right.
if you want to play basketball or play this sport that's not stereotypically a girl sport, if you want to wear the color blue, that's my daughter's favorite color. her mountain bike is green. If you want to pursue these experiences, that's not traditionally what a girl would do. I think it's easier for us in this day and age to support that
Yes.
and to promote that type of thinking, because that is more modern, forward thinking. And there's almost a sense of like pride and identity, because that's like part of being a girl dad too. Like this
Right.
day and age, it's like supporting your daughters and teaching them that they can grow up to be whatever they want to be, right? And so I think that that's an easier experience than the other way around, to where, like, as you were talking, like, this is the princess bathroom. So in my mind, I'm like, well, technically, that doesn't need to change, you know? You guys don't need to change the colors. You don't need to change out the toys, because
That's
technically,
true.
boys can play with whatever they want. But you and I know that there is that societal
Yes.
pressure. And you and I know that we have also been socialized to have a reaction to, if our son picks up the doll instead of
Right.
the monster truck. Even as forward thinking men, something still happens, in the
Right.
back of our mind, or to where it's like, we've just been socialized to have a reaction to that. Or
Mhm.
if you see your son crying, he falls down, scrapes his knee, we've been socialized to have a reaction to that and
Right.
tell him get up, as opposed to how we would react to our daughter. And this is all things that are happening subconsciously,
Right.
and that's how conditioning works. But I know that I think I might react a certain way if my son did something, but I also know how I would truly be feeling. And so I wonder, for you,
Mhm.
us sort of balancing this is modern fatherhood. We're not
Yes.
like those guys from back in the day that didn't let their son express emotions or didn't hug their kid,
Yep.
right? So like that's part of our identity. But do you feel like you will come across those challenges with bringing a boy into this world?
Yeah. Yeah, what makes this interesting, because to your point, like, no, you're right. Those things don't have to change. It's not like, oh, hey, boys coming into the house, all those things got to change. Right. Now that being said, in terms of like, how are these scenarios handled? Hey, look, I'll be honest. If one of my daughters falls, I take the approach like, hey, get up.
Mhm.
Like that's the approach I take, right?
Right.
But the other thing is, and I'm very proud of this, is I'm pretty emotionally inclined, and I'm, for whatever reason, having kids. I don't know if it's having kids or if it's having girls.
Mm.
Like, I almost feel like I can't watch a movie without like feeling that emotional uproar. Like,
Right.
and sometimes I'll tap my wife on the shoulder, like, why do I feel like I'm about to cry right now? Right. Like, so there is that in me, right? I
Mhm.
am that person. And that's not who I was as a child or even as a young man.
Uh-huh.
So for me, uh I'll speak specifically to that emotional component, because this is
Right.
something that, Andrew, you and I talk about this, but even in friend circles, I tell a lot of guys that are, 30, 40, 50, like, it's okay to
Mhm.
cry. Like, it's okay to be intertwined with your emotions, because if we continue to suppress those, and we see this, and Andrew, you know this from a clinical perspective,
Mhm.
that it's not good to suppress these things. And so for a child, it's very important for them to be comfortable with that. And I do that with my nephew. Like, hey, man, it's okay to feel this way. It's okay to express yourself. Let's sit down. Let's talk about this, as opposed to, and I see this in, some of the ways that, uh, even my dad talks to nephew, right?
Mhm.
I'm like, Dad, that's not good. Like, you can't do that.
Right.
right? And so, I think, to be honest with you, the emotional side of the house, I think that piece is going to be fairly simple because that's how
Mhm.
I operate, and that's
Right.
how I champion friends that are around me and other males in my life. I'm like, look, this is okay, and we need to be okay. It's okay to ask for help. It's okay to be emotionally inclined, and you should champion your children, girl or boy, to do the
Mhm.
same. Now, then there's the other side of it, right?
Yeah,
Which
what
is,
about the dolls?
yeah, which is the doll component and all of these things. And for what I can remember, and I've asked my parents about this, for what I can remember, and for what I've been told, I was one to play with a doll, and that
Mhm.
was okay, right? Me and my sister were 5.5 years apart, but we were close as children, and so that's what I was exposed to. But I was also exposed to all my cousins and friends, who a lot of them were boys and a good mix of girls, and so I had a very balanced childhood in that retrospect.
Mhm.
So I don't think that's going to be a challenge, mainly because, I mean, the other reality is he's going to have two older sisters. Like, to try to create an environment where it's like, hey, you can't do this is unrealistic. I
Yeah, I don't necessarily think that it's going to come from, like, within the household
No, it's
because
definitely a societal
right,
component. Yeah,
right, because it is easier to control the environment in the home.
right.
And so that's where I know I can talk a good game.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah, yeah.
yeah, in the house, if he picked up a doll, yeah, I'm good, right? But
Yes.
once we leave the house
Yeah, what
and
does it look
your
like?
child is playing with the dolls or he's wearing
Mm,
pink or he's
yeah,
doing this or that you'll have other men who still have that mindset of
correct.
boys shouldn't do
Didn't
that,
do
and
that.
that societal pressure is just always
Yeah,
there, and
it's
so, like,
there.
how do you plan? And, that's something that I'm not going to
Yeah,
experience.
you
It's
won't
something
have to experience it.
right, it's something I champion, I will support you 100%, but it's also different when it's happening to you and your
Correct.
kid, and you want to protect your kid so that they don't have those negative experience of somebody making fun of them or, talking down to them, and so it's one of those things where it's like, how do you handle it?
It's interesting. So when you pose it that way, this is very interesting. And for the audience to understand where I'm coming from on this, I am very comfortable with who I am. And there's no video to this podcast, and today's not a great example because I'm wearing black, but I typically am in a very colorful type of uh I'm typically in colorful clothing.
Yeah,
My
you
favorite color,
like your colors.
my
Yeah,
favorite color is purple,
right.
right? I have pink and purple blue basketball shoes. My golf cleats are white, pink, and blue. Uh I am very uh uh on a normal basis, the likelihood that I'm wearing some type of bright color is very, very high.
Mhm.
And so this, we had an episode of while back, um that talked a little bit about career and things of the like. And I've been that person in the corporate environment that's like, hey, I will wear any and every color in the rainbow, and I don't
Mhm.
care what anybody has to say about it. So bringing that full circle, I think there's a certain amount of comfort and, or I guess for lack of a better way of putting it, or lack of other terminology, display, where I wear these colors. And so for my child to wear those colors, I don't see that as being a challenge. the components of like a doll or a stuffy or something like that. To be honest with you, Andrew, I would argue I see a lot of young boys, especially in our environment. Now, we may be outliers in our neck of the woods, but I think I would argue I see a lot more young boys carrying around some type of comfort stuffy or something of the like. I'm sure that stops at a certain age, right? Whether that be via them, whether that be via society, or whether that be from their parental figures. But I would argue I see a lot of it now. So in reality, I don't know what that's going to look like. What I would like to believe is that the position that me and my wife take on how our children present themselves to the world and how they carry themselves to the, out of our home is not different than the way that it is inside. That's what I would like to believe. How that pans out in actuality, only time will tell.
Well, I like that you said that, because I think that's where the difference might be, and I think it's just helpful having an awareness within yourself as well too, that this is how I would like to react,
Right.
but there is a possibility that my feelings and emotions can change, and I think it is just challenging for kids. As young kids, they do tend to get away more with, crossing that line. And I think even
Yes.
as adults, like once you get to a point where, I'm almost 40, I
Yeah.
don't care like
Right.
what people say about my outfit. But there is a crucial age for kids as well, too, to where, thinking back, I can remember having certain interests but not pursuing them because of what people might
Right.
say. Or, for boys, like, hey dad, I really want to try out ballet. Like, I
Yeah.
remember a kid in the neighborhood trying out for like cheerleading, and I was part of the group making fun of that as well
Right.
too, and like bringing on that pressure. And so I know it exists, and I know that it's out there.
Yep.
It's just one of those things that, eventually the kids are going to experience it. And so as parents, when that happens, or when your kid comes to you, or your son comes to you and he says, I want to do ballet,
Right.
what
Yeah.
what's
Well,
that
but
what's
you
that
know
reaction at me?
so
Yeah.
what's interesting about this? This is interesting, and maybe there's potential that I'm maybe considered a unicorn in this scenario, uh, as it pertains to dads and thought process. But I think there's two, maybe more parts to addressing this scenario. The one side of it is what we had just talked about in regards to, or what we talked about earlier in the episode, in regards to allowing that raw reaction and allowing that raw experience.
Mhm.
And there's something to, and we see this now with children. I think this is a negative component of our society, in the sense where, like, Andrew, you and I don't experience this much because our kids are outside. They're playing with other children, but many kids aren't spending a lot of time outside. They're spending a lot of time inside in front of a screen by themselves. And there's this, like you said, between a certain age range, there's like this beautiful thing that happens between children of self-policing activity and social, let's say, compliance, if you
Mhm.
will. And so there's a beautiful thing that happens there. Now, to your point, though, there's some negative components, or especially as it pertains to boys, where, if they do have a doll, or if they are wearing a particular color, or if they do have a specific interest, where that could render a negative result or a negative reaction. And I don't know that it's our job as parents to prevent it. I think there's a certain point where you're like, yeah, I don't want them to experience this, but I don't know. And again, this isn't a vacuum because they haven't experienced this yet. But in my mind, I don't know that it's our job as fathers to try to prevent it. Again, there's a part of me that's like, here's what my experience was. Here's what I would like my child's experience to be. And then there's going to be the reality factor. I don't know what the reality factor looks like, but I can honestly say we've put extensive thought to it, and we've laid out some thoughts and parameters, and we'll see what transpires.
Right. Yeah. And, as we wrap up, that's a good point. I think it is everything we've kind of talked about in this episode is hypothetical, right?
Yes.
Like we have no idea what's going to happen. I will say this though, just in terms of preparedness, I don't think it's necessarily a parent's role to prevent things from happening, just because there's only so much that you can do once they leave your house. There's going to be influences coming from left, right, down the middle, from everywhere. I do think that empowering your child is important, and being aware of what could be said. And even, like my daughter, her favorite color is blue. And when we got her bike, her first one was blue. This new one is green. Like, I have a conversation with her. Like, these are some things that, people might say. They might say, this is a boy's color. This is this. What are you going to say back? Or what is something that we can say back? And we practice that as well too, so that it doesn't become as what I call is a scarring moment. Like those significant moments that don't necessarily seem traumatic, but they like change your trajectory because they make you realize, oh, I'm a girl or I'm a boy. I'm not allowed to do this.
Yes.
Right. And so if I can empower them in any way I can to say, and you and I know with having children of color, right, there's certain conversations that we have to have with them. Like, hey, you might experience this. We can't stop it from happening, but here are some things that you can say back, or here's how you can respond in that scenario. And to your point, it's one of those things. We'll see what happens when baby number 3 gets here, and we'll see how your mindset might shift or your parenting dynamics might shift as well. I think something that's very important to just let the audience know is that we are not perfect, right? And we are well-meaning dads, and we have this idea of how things should be or how we want to raise our children. But, this is a scenario that we're not sure what's going to happen. I think there's everyone has a game plan until they get punched in the face. Right.
It's the Mike Tyson
right.
approach. Everybody's got
y'all
a plan
might
until they
be
get punched in the face.
Punched in the face.
Well, and the reality is, here's the reality, before we end this episode.
Yeah.
The reality is, if I could give any, we can call it advice, but if I can give anything to any father out there or expecting father out there, is understand that if it's your first, if you are listening to this and you are an expecting father, your life is about to change drastically. Again, hopefully in a positive manner. I believe having children is a phenomenal thing. I think it changes you, especially if you are having a girl. I think it changes who you are. It changes you as a man, and it shifts the way that you approach life. You think about things differently. I am one that believes everybody should have a girl. That's just my gut feeling from having girls and seeing the shift that it created for me from who I was as a young man. Secondarily, I would say in the same breath, let's not forget that as a father or expecting father, whatever your partnership or relationship looks like, there is a partner in this scenario, and making sure that, yes, keeping the kids in the forefront is a good thought, but also understand that you have a partner that's going to be there, hopefully, with you beyond the kids leaving the home, right? And so don't forget the partnership that you have there. And Andrew, if I'm not mistaken, we talked a little bit about that in a previous episode to some degree, not as a full topic, but do not forget that there's another side to your relationship, again, whatever that looks like, and that if you are a two-parent household or whatever may have you, that relationship is going to exist past the time where your kids leave the household. And it's very important that you keep that in the forefront, because without that, you can't serve the children in the best way possible. Again, depends on your relationship, depends if you're a single father or whatever may have you, then obviously those things change. But in a dual partnership home, that relationship is just as important as the relationship with the children, because that's what they're exposed to every day.
Right. Yeah, and I think that's, a whole topic that we could go on just in terms of how your dynamic with your partner changes from, when you introduce a new kid into the fold. So we'll save that for another day. Many thanks to Bryson for agreeing to be put on the hot seat. And
I'm an open book any day of the week.
Share his experience with baby number 3. And perhaps we'll check in come October. Well, I guess it would have to be after October.
Yeah, I think January seems like a good, 3 months
probably
in.
be back above water. Okay. Yeah, maybe we'll the January episode we'll check back in and see how things are going and see how your views may or may not have changed, but very, very interesting to find out. So thank you all for joining us for another episode of Talking Fatherhood, and we will catch you next time.
Thank you for tuning in to today's episode of Talking Fatherhood. Make sure to like, comment, subscribe, and share this episode. We'll catch you next time.